This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you Episode 10 of Season 3 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, March 5th, 1910. I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford in 1910. The March 5th issue begins with the Westford Center section. It has been decided that it will not be necessary to close the library this year for the annual cleaning of the building and the enumeration of books. Mr. and Mrs. Elliot F. Humiston were in Boston last Saturday and enjoyed grand opera. H.L. Wright spent last Sunday with the Henry M. Wrights at Quincy, and while there attended the Washington Street Congregational Church, which is Mr. Marshall's new charge. He was the former pastor at the Congregational Church, I believe. He reports a large congregation, a pretty church, and that the Marshall's new home is very pleasant, quite a model of comfort and convenience. Our faithful village nurse, Miss Mary Moran, has reversed the usual order of things and been the sick one herself this past week with a hard cold and a touch of pleurisy, requiring medical help, but is now nearly back to her own vigorous, normal self. Charles L. Hildreth has been confined to his home on Boston Road this past week with an attack of the grip. Edward M. Abbott Hose Company held their regular monthly meeting at their headquarters, now the Westford Museum, Tuesday evening. Reverend Mr. Wallace preached an excellent sermon to a large congregation Sunday morning, a well-educated discourse upon the difference between merely making a living and making a life. It was practical and helpful to a degree without being commonplace. The topic was based in thoughts from Christ's call to Zacchaeus, which you can find in Luke chapter 9, verses 1 to 10. The new pastor and his family are getting nicely settled at the parsonage, and the two daughters have become enrolled as pupils at the Frost School. Our townsman Donald M. Cameron, who is spending the winter with his family in Lowell, goes this month with other friends from New York for a trip through the Spanish Main. They will visit Kingston in Jamaica, Colon in Panama, Port Limon in Costa Rica, and will land at New Orleans, making the journey northward by rail. Miss Edna Ferguson returned to her teaching in Beverly after being detained at home for 2 weeks with a serious cold. Weather and traveling and the all-prevalent colds were causes for postponing the meeting of the WC2U Wednesday afternoon at Mrs. E.J. Whitney's for 1 week at the same time and place. Miss Eva E. Fletcher, who underwent an operation for appendicitis last week, Wednesday, at the Lowell Hospital, is making most satisfactory progress toward recovery and may be able to return home in another week. The next section is the Tadmuck Club section. The Tadmuck Club held its regular bi-monthly meeting Tuesday afternoon at Library Hall. The program for the afternoon was the last one in the season story of Alaska, which the members certainly feel have proven instructive and valuable. Mrs. Leonard W. Wheeler was in charge of the afternoon and gave a paper on, quote, 10 years of progress in Alaska, end quote, showing the remarkable development of this country along all lines in one brief decade. Leonard W. Wheeler gave an interesting sketch of the work of Dr. Sheldon Jackson and his introduction of reindeer into Alaska. The club voted to send remembrances in the shape of flowers and a letter to Miss Fletcher at the hospital. The next section is the About Town section. As usual, the Friday evening entertainment at the vestry of the Unitarian Church, in attendance and liberality in its incoming cash, was satisfactory. The supper was one of the satisfactory features, as of old they have ever been at this religious hotel. Lowell contributed contributed its Celia Ladies Orchestra that made all who love music continue in that love. Westford contributed its talented reader and impersonator, Miss May Balch, who impressed all with, quote, "Easy isn't it if you only have the talent," end quote. Littleton contributed 32 folks, several horses, and a barge. Westford contributed its managers for the evening, Miss May Balch, Mrs. Lizzie Hamlin, Mrs. J. Herbert Fletcher, who made the evening a great success. The barge referred to here is just a large wagon or coach that could hold more than the average number of people. It's horse-drawn. The contest at the recent Farmers Institute at Littleton and Westford, the first prize was awarded to Vernon Fletcher of the Sargent School, Graniteville. He is a son of Harry N. Fletcher, the well-known stone contractor. The contestants from the academy at Westford decided not to be contestants ere the dawning of the day had established itself. Thus is the profundity of their ability unmeasured by competition. The Cavalry Association held a business meeting Saturday afternoon at the rooms of its charming, sunny environment on Boston Road. That's the building at 20 Boston Road. Several names were voted on as members of the association and accepted. The regulations of the association were changed by vote of the meeting, which allows the association building open every Saturday afternoon and evening until 11:30 at the expense of the association. Those desiring the stimulus of recreation from these guarded and housed environments, as in dancing, must pay the fiddler. It was unanimously voted to allow the free use of Cavalry Building to the Westford Veterans Association. Henry Smith, the superintendent for Abbott and Company at Graniteville, thinks he was the first to thaw out winter for spring plantings and succeeded in coaxing the ground to receive the first planting of peas of the season last Saturday, February 26th. As he is competing with the writer, that is Samuel L. Taylor, for first place in early peas, there is no telling how much in advance of last Saturday's planting one is. Suffice it to say, none of your New Jersey, California flank movements for early peas as last year, but a real frozen ground February contest. The next paragraph is called Money for Town Expenses. The Financial Committee have completed their estimate of amounts of money necessary for town expenses for the coming year. The writer has not seen the report, but authority says the totals foot up $36,000, or $6,000 more than last year. Among the recommendations by the committee for raising money is $500 for the observance of Memorial Day. This day will be observed for the dedication of the Soldiers' Monument, the gift of Colonel Edwin D. Metcalf, a former resident of the town. The day means much. It means a loyal appreciation of those who left the rural pursuits of the town for the perils of soldier life with its Libby prisons, impaired health, and the early grave. This appropriation carries with it the usual exercises on such occasions. Oration probably by ex-Governor John D. Long, music, instrumental and vocal, and the ever apt and appetizing dinner with the after reflections of wit and wise thought. The generosity of the soldier with his life, whose presence we greet no more in visible form, as well as those living in our midst with the evidence of a war record, should make us all generous with the day in appropriate exercises and resources. They're referring to the Soldiers' Monument on the little triangle where Hildreth Street comes into Boston Road. Has a Civil War soldier on it, and we'll be reading quite a bit more about that as this year rolls on. The next paragraph is called Electric Power. Something doing on Oak Hill at all times, and new at that. Just now it is more power. Not individual power direct, but directed. With increased business comes increased machinery, which must have more power, which brings up at the point of beginning, power. The steam power plant at Oak Hill Stone Quarry is to have electricity as an associate, and the H.E. Fletcher and Company, ever busy stone contractors, have contracted with the Lowell Electric Light Company to furnish electricity for power, and the poles for the wires are already being established in the earth. With steam, electricity, improved machinery, and well-equipped personalities to press the button, the life of Oak Hill is well lit up and is free from the groping of candlelight power. They're talking about these granite quarries, of course, on the Groton Road on Oak Hill. The next section is called basketball, spelt as two separate words. The Westford Academy basketball team defeated the Shirley High School team last Saturday afternoon at Shirley, scoring 26-6. Judges of the sporting element of life, who were close witnesses of this contest, concede that the Westford team outclassed in speed and training the Shirley team. The noticeable feature of the game was the work of Feeney, Bannister, and Walkden, and the rapidity of perpetual motion of the Tallant brothers, Tallant brothers, for the Westford team. The next section is the Forge Village section. Mrs. Abba H. Comey, who has been confined to her home the past week with illness. Miss Mary Leclerc is recovering from an attack of mumps. Mrs. John Carmichael, née Harriet Precious, visited her sister, Mrs. Michael Keefe, née Annie Precious, at Townsend Harbor Tuesday. Her little nephew, Master David Keefe, returning with her. The Precious family lived just in the house just to the south of Cameron Senior, what is now Cameron Senior Center. Miss Catherine Brown has been confined to her home the past week by illness. Dr. W.H. Sherman is attending her. The next paragraph is entitled Death. Mrs. John Spinner received word early in the week of the accidental death of her brother, Walter Wheeler of Billerica, Essex, England. The accident occurred February 15th while he was engaged in demolishing buildings at Hare Lodge near Rumford, England. He was fatally crushed by a wall falling upon him. He was taken to the hospital where he died an hour later. The accident is particularly sad as he was the sole support of his aged parents with whom he made his home. He leaves besides his parents Mr. and Mrs. Eben Wheeler, who is 79, and her husband, 80 years old, 4 sisters, Mrs. John Spinner of this village, Mrs. Fred Ramsey, Mrs. Walter Veer, and Miss Catherine Wheeler. Also 3 brothers, Alfred, Henry, and Edward Wheeler, all of England. I think this goes to show that many people in Westford a century ago still had close ties to family back in Great Britain and other parts of Europe, especially as time went on and more people were imported to work in the mills, the Abbott Worsted mills. The next section is Graniteville. Eugene Cote, a young man of this village, died at the Lowell General Hospital after a long and painful illness on Thursday, February 25th. His remains were brought to his home on River Street, and the funeral took place Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. At 9:30 o'clock, a requiem mass was celebrated in St. Catherine's Church by Reverend J.J. McNamara. The bearers were Henry Cote, Joseph Cote, Adelard Cote, Oscar Milo, Donna Milo, and Fred Gagnon. Burial was in St. Catherine's Cemetery, this village. Undertaker J.A. Healy was in charge. Vernon Fletcher of this village won first prize in the drawing contest in competition with scholars from the Westford, Littleton, and other schools at the Farmers Institute in Littleton last Thursday. Vernon is a scholar in the grammar grade of the Sargent School here. Rehearsals have begun for the comedy drama to be presented by the Entertainment Committee of Court Westford 170, Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters. The play will be given in Westford in the early spring. The regular meeting of Court Graniteville 179, Foresters of America, was held in its room on Thursday evening. Business of importance was transacted after the meeting, and entertainment was held, which was greatly enjoyed by the members. Mrs. Joseph Wall of this village spent Sunday as the guest of Miss Minnie Alforth in Lawrence. Lenten devotions were held in St. Catherine's Church on Wednesday at the usual hour. William L. Wall has recently accepted a position in the wallpaper department of the Houghton and Dutton store in Boston and took charge of his new duties a few days ago. That's the news in Westford for the week ending March 5th, 1910. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Ryan Cousins of Westford Cat for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from a century ago. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.